Her fiancé wouldn't stop asking about the ranch, so her father started asking questions. A widowed rancher notices a chilling pattern in his daughter's future husband, uncovers a calculated plan to steal her inheritance, and prepares one final move to expose the truth on the wedding day itself. Good evening, friends. Pull up a chair and settle in. Tonight, I want to tell you a story about a ranch in Colorado, a father's instinct, and a question that was asked just a few times too often. This isn't my story. It belongs to a man named Richard. Richard Caldwell was a retired engineer who found peace on 200 acres of land near the spreading edges of Denver. He'd lived there for 30 years with his wife, Eleanor. They'd bought the scrubland for a song, built a life on it, and watched the city creep closer. When cancer took Eleanor 3 years ago, Richard stayed on alone, tending to the place that held her memory. His daughter, Chloe, was his greatest comfort. She visited every weekend, worried about her father in that big, empty house. Everything changed when Chloe brought home a man named Landon. Landon Miller was a financial planner from Denver, 33 years old, clean-cut, and saying all the right things. He praised Richard's late wife's gardening, asked thoughtful questions about the ranch, and seemed utterly taken with Chloe. Richard wanted to be happy for his daughter. After a previous difficult relationship, she deserved someone good. The engagement came quickly, just a few months after they met. The wedding was planned for late September at the ranch itself, right where Eleanor had loved most. But a pattern began to emerge, subtle and persistent. Every single time Landon visited, he would find a way to bring up the same subject. He'd stand at the kitchen window, cup of coffee in hand, gazing out at the meadow that stretched toward the distant tree line. "So, Richard," he'd say, his tone casual, almost offhand, "where exactly does your property end?" The first time, Richard thought nothing of it. The second, he assumed it was just a city boy's curiosity about wide-open spaces. By the fifth time, a cold knot began to tighten in Richard's engineer's gut. He had spent a career solving problems by recognizing patterns, and Landon's pattern was becoming unmistakably clear. Chloe would laugh it off. "He's just interested, Dad. You know how fascinated he is with ranch life." But the question about the boundary line never varied. It was always about the edge of the land, the limit of what Richard owned. The wedding plans surged forward. Chloe was a whirlwind of caterers, florists, and invitations for 200 guests. Landon was the picture of helpfulness, always smiling, always offering suggestions. One Saturday in July, he stood with Richard looking over the area chosen for the ceremony. "You know, Richard," Landon said, gesturing broadly, "we could really open up this vista if we cleared some of those trees along the western edge." Those trees were the property line. Richard pointed this out, his voice level. "Right," Landon said, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "But how far back does your land actually go? I'm just thinking about the potential." There it was again. That same question. That evening, after Landon and Chloe had driven back to Denver, the silence of the ranch house felt heavy. Richard sat in his worn leather chair in the study, the room where he and Eleanor used to plan their future. He pulled out the old property deed, 215 acres, purchased in 1994 for $80,000. Every penny had been a sacrifice for him and Eleanor. Now, with Denver's expansion, developers circled like hawks. He'd received offers, staggering sums of money. But he couldn't sell. This land was Eleanor's dream, and now it was her memorial. Chloe understood that. She had grown up here, helped her mother plant the wildflower garden that still bloomed in chaotic beauty every spring. Richard knew the ranch's current market value was over $4 million. But the land was only the visible part of his story. During his engineering career, he had quietly invented a minor but crucial valve component for commercial HVAC systems. It was not glamorous, but the royalties had flowed steadily for 25 years. Combined with careful investments, Richard's total net worth was just over $8 million. He had chosen to live simply, driving a 10-year-old pickup, repairing fences himself, valuing solitude over status. He had seen how money could poison families, turning loved ones into adversaries over an inheritance. He wanted none of that for Chloe. He had raised her to be grounded, and she had never pried into his finances. She knew they were comfortable, but she believed comfortable meant a paid-off ranch and a modest pension. She had no idea about the patents or the investment accounts. Now, Landon Miller was asking about property lines. Richard's instinct, honed over decades of precise calculation, screamed that this was not innocent curiosity. It was reconnaissance. The next morning, he made a call to his attorney, a sharp and trustworthy woman named Margaret in Boulder. "Margaret," he said, his voice low, "I need a background check, a deep one, on Landon Miller." Margaret knew Richard was not an alarmist. She heard the steel in his voice and agreed to look into Chloe's fiancé. 3 days later, Richard drove to Margaret's office in Boulder. She met him with a solemn expression and closed the door. "The surface report is clean," she began, handing him a folder. "Landon Miller is a licensed financial planner with Carter and Reed Wealth Management in Denver. No criminal record, excellent credit. Everything appears perfectly legitimate." Richard scanned the documents, but he saw the hesitation in Margaret's eyes. "But?" he prompted. Margaret slid a second, thinner file across the desk. "I had our investigator dig deeper, into his personal history. Richard, Landon has been engaged twice before, both times to women from prominent, wealthy families." Richard's blood seemed to cool in his veins. Margaret continued. "The first was to a woman named Lauren Abbott, daughter of a Silicon Valley executive. That engagement lasted 5 months. It ended abruptly 2 weeks after Landon attended a family meeting about the Abbott Family Trust." She pointed to the next line. "The second was to a woman named Natalie Pierce, whose father is a major commercial real estate developer. That engagement lasted 4 months. It ended right after Mr. Pierce revised his will. In both cases, there were no lawsuits, nay,